Welcome to Talking Feds, a roundtable that brings together prominent former federal officials and special guests for a dynamic discussion of the most important political and legal topics of the day. I'm Harry Littman, and this is our periodic Contrarian episode with guests drawn from the ranks of the Contrarian's strong and deep bench. It was a week that saw the country convulsed by the stunning killing of the prominent conservative activist Charlie Kirk at a public event in Utah. As we wait to learn more about the suspect and his motivations, the broader political impact of the killing was already stark. In these roiled, blood-red moments, the country expects the president to issue a unifying call to rise above partisanship and hate. Not so Donald Trump, who used the event to polarize and gain political advantage. Trump told the nation that, quote, radical left lunatics are out there and, quote, we just have to beat the hell out of them. How Trump's intemperate response will influence the country's fury and divisions in the coming days remains to be seen. But his absence of any public spirit and his inability to see past his own narrow interests have never been clearer. The manhunt for the killer put the FBI in the spotlight, especially in light of a broad-gauged lawsuit from 3 former senior officials alleging a political takeover and hollowing out of professional standards at the nation's highest law enforcement agency. The gist of the allegations was that, as with the Department of Justice, the Bureau has been transformed into Trump's private security patrol with its North Star, Trump's political fortunes. And overseas, the Brazil Supreme Court provided a demonstration of how a well-functioning democracy can respond to an unlawful effort to stay in power. The court affirmed a 27-year prison sentence for former President Jair Bolsonaro, based on facts strikingly similar to Trump's attempted power grab after the 2020 election. To work through the turbulent fallout from Kirk's killing and the flashing warning signs at the FBI, I'm really pleased to welcome 3 of the leading voices from the Contrarian. And they are George Conway, a prominent American attorney and president of the Society for the Rule of Law. He's also the co-host of the podcast, George Conway Explains It All, a frequent commentator on CNN, and of course, a founding contributor to The Contrarian. George, great to see you.
Hello.
Jennifer Rubin, the co-founder, editor-in-chief, and lifeblood of The Contrarian. Before launching The Contrarian, she wrote an opinion column for 14 years at The Washington Post, the former paper of record of the national capital. Jen, so glad you're a Contrarian with us, and thank you very much for joining.
It's always fun.
And dropping in by parachute, as he's wont to do, retired ambassador Norm Eisen, who's the founder and executive chair of the State Democracy Defenders Fund and the publisher of The Contrarian. He will join us when and if he can. I'm sure, no doubt, we'll have some contributions from Norm before this tape is published. All right, and speaking of which, we tape Friday afternoon. The country is roiled. It seems half somber and half enraged at the killing of Kirk. Indications are the suspect may have confessed to a family member. Officials believe he acted alone. Let's just leave that investigation, which we're not privy to, and move to the fallout and the culture of political violence that it is laying bare. I mean, the country seems riven in two and utterly consumed by passionate intensity, to quote Yeats, but it feels darker and more portentous than other political, even assassinations. Is that right? And why do you think it's right if it is?
It's hard to tell whether what you just described that absolutely exists within the political realm is really the case among 330 million Americans. I don't know that people who may only occasionally tune into the news because they have actual lives feel this same sense of impending doom and this culture of violence that we now live in. I think what was interesting about what you said, Harry, is people are furious for different reasons. The right has selective outrage and is only upset when someone, quote, on their side, which they don't define as America, they define as their political supporters, is harmed. But they joke about, they mock, they ignore when the, quote, other side is harmed. So we get these really grotesque statements from the president from the Oval Office blaming half the country before the person was even apprehended or any motives were discerned. And we have this continuing sort of rhetorical and moral imbalance in this country, where one side condemns violence wherever it comes, and the other foments it, as they did on January 6th, and only condemns it when their side is victims. And if you dare mention this, well, then you're just politicizing and being an insensitive creep. And I think we're able to make some distinctions here. I think we can say murder and assassination is always wrong. It's always corrosive to democracy. And, oh, by the way, Charlie Kirk's views were nothing to celebrate. They were racist. He was an election denier. But it's precisely because we don't agree on what he was saying that we find assassination of anyone aboard. That's what the First Amendment is all about, folks. It is defending people whose views you hate. And it is also possible to condemn the president who can never manage to be president for all the people because he has no capacity to do so. George, more than anyone else, has talked about this. When you have a pathological narcissist in the White House, it's not that he doesn't want to, he just can't. It's like asking a colorblind person to discern shades of pink. It's beyond his capacity.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's not much to add to what Jen just said, but the selective outrage is really, really, really something. And about what Jen just said about President Trump, I mean, I just saw something on my Twitter feed just a moment ago. There's a clip from Fox and Friends this morning. Ashley Earhart, or whatever her name is, says, "We have radicals on the right as well. How do we fix this country?" And this was the response of the President of the United States at Fox this morning. "I'll tell you something that's going to get me in trouble, but I couldn't care less." He's saying couldn't care less about violence from the right. The radicals on the right oftentimes are radical because they don't want to see crime. The radicals on the left are the problem. Right? I mean, he only cares, because he is a pathological narcissist, about people who aren't on his side. And if you're on his side, he will cut you slack. Or if he thinks that you're on his side, he will cut you slack. CEG, the January 6th pardons. CEG Charlottesville, where he said, find people on both sides, because he understood that he was being asked to criticize people who actually supported him because they thought he was a racist like they were. But it gets beyond that. I mean, it goes also to his malignancy, his psychopathy and sociopathy. He wants there to be violence, I think. I think he really deep down wants there to be violence. It's just, he just wants the violence to be on his side. And you can see this because they're not just failing to criticize violence on the right and criticizing only on the left and just attributing this murder to the left without any evidence before they even had a suspect, before they knew anything about the suspect. Although we're starting to learn more this morning, they were already saying, this is the left did this, the left caused this. And they caused it directly. There's somebody who is clearly Antifa, or it's a trans person, or they're suggesting that people like us who basically sound the alarm bells on authoritarianism, who basically say that this regime is behaving fascistically and in an authoritarian fashion, and draw parallels to what happened in Nazi Germany in the 1930s. We're responsible because we are saying that they should be killed because they're fascists and Nazis, which is not what we're saying. We're just saying our democracy is at stake. And it turns out it may very well be that this guy, he's from South Utah. St. George, Utah, which is there is no Antifa there. Maybe he's the one guy. We're going to see whether this kid was right or left, or more also likely just confused, as a lot of these young men who grow up with weapons and, are terminally online, and they're completely fucked up. They don't know what they're thinking. They think that their mind is an ideological mess, a jumble. But the fact is that what Trump wants to do with, and this is the real point, with the killing of Charlie Kirk, is to create an excuse for more violence. You saw that immediately before they even knew who this guy was, basically saying the left did it. It's the same thing that Goebbels did in 1930 with the killing of a young man, a young SS person called Horst Wessel. And that kid became the poster child for persecution of Nazis in the Weimar Republic, and the Horst Wessel song became the Nazi Party song. They use it as a rallying point to say that they are persecuted and that they are justified in using force. And we saw that again with the President of the United States saying, this morning, we need to beat the hell out of the radical left, is what he said.
Trump takes to the airwaves. Any responsible president of any party at a point tries to be a uniter or condemn violence generally. So he not only puts out a litany that is simply composed of anything that's happened to people on the right with a deafening silence about the other side, but he basically has said it's the rhetoric. In other words, it's us.
Criticizing me. It's criticizing me is the cause. That's basically what he said.
That's exactly right. And, it seems like so much of what he says kind of risible, but what do you think? Leaving aside the really sort of frothing faithful who will be up in arms at anything, and the people who are already against him, does this actually sound a chord within the ever diminishing middle in the country, so that this trope actually begins to take hold of either false whataboutism, they both, on either side, or literally that it's a problem of the left based on political criticism of the president?
Well, a few things. First of all, there's a lot of intentional dumbness on the right. So that when George makes this analogy, he is not calling Charlie Kirk a Nazi. He's saying the technique of creating martyrs is a common technique that we have seen amongst the right wing and amongst fascist groups. So
throughout history.
Correct. So the next thing is, we know that when Trump wants a specific action at a specific time, he has been the one to do it. He called people to the Capitol. He sent them to the Hill. He called it a day of love. He then pardoned them all. He has then fired the prosecutors who put these people in jail. So the notion that he is concerned about crime is just ridiculous. Now, I think what happens, Carrie, and this is what I think is so injurious to democracy, is the average person just looks at this and sees they're all awful, they're all to blame. And that's what they want. They want a complete disaffection from democracy. They want people to put their heads in the sand so that their highly activated, highly activist folks can dominate the politics, the discord, and that they can shame others into silence, or they can scare people into silence, and that they get the lowest possible turnout of anybody in the kind of normal political realm, and just their people turn out to vote. So I am less concerned that half the country actually believes that the left, whatever the heck that means, has done this, than I am that millions and millions of people will just turn it all off and say, this is why I don't vote. This is why I don't give a darn. And frankly, the mainstream media makes it worse by being moral cretins, by refusing to make moral distinctions, by saying, we can't say bad things about Charlie Kirk because he was killed. No, those two things are not related. You can say bad things about Charlie Kirk's views and emphatically say it's wrong to assassinate people. You don't have to treat the two parties the same. In fact, you should be emphasizing over and over again so that the American people get it. There is one pro-democracy party and there is one anti-democracy party. And their inability to say that makes this problem worse. And it plays into this nihilism that Trump tries to spread, where anyone normal, anyone sensible just checks out.
I absolutely agree. I mean, the MSNBC firing Matt Dowd, who's not always been my favorite commentator, but I can't figure out exactly what he said that was inappropriate or wrong. I mean, maybe the timing of it, I understand.
Took about 6 minutes too, right, for Glasser to can him. Yeah.
Obviously, we hate, as just human beings, we hate to speak ill of the dead. But what's going on here is the media is contributing to it because it lacks courage. But Trump and the right, the MAGA right, are lionizing this guy, and some liberals are falling for it. They're turning him into, this is part of the Horst Wessel martyr building campaign. And you have to point out the selectivity of it all. And basically you have to point out that they're doing this to create an excuse for more authoritarianism.
Let's zero in there and bring in the ambassador, because besides he has a very personal and poignant connection to all of that. I recommend his first book. But that's really what comes home about the Horst Wessel idea, is that, and there are parts of Trump not simply failed to call out any of the violence on the other side, but he basically has given indications of we've got to crack down. So that's the actual, I think, immediate concern. Is there some way in which they try to lower a boom and justify it? And what does it even look like?
Well,
Norm, welcome, by the way. Thanks for your double duty as always.
Thank you, Harry. Hi, Jen.
Hello.
Hi, George. The perils of being a working litigator at my advanced age is with our over 125 legal matters at the Democracy Defenders Fund. I'm constantly getting pulled into things. Very glad to be with you. This is the subject of my Contrarian Weekly publisher's note, precisely how to balance our humanity and our fundamental decency and our condemnation of all political violence with also speaking out against its exploitation. And what Donald Trump did in rushing before he or anyone knew the details of the perpetrator to blame one side, his political adversaries, actually is more dishonorable to the memory and to our shared humanity and to decency than anything a television commentator might have done or said. And, there's a reason that public officials, there was extreme embarrassment for the FBI director as well, who was flip-flopping. We have the perpetrator, we don't have the perpetrator. Why you wait? I think we have to view the tragedy of this death in that broader context, and that includes talking about the political violence that has targeted both sides, the attack on Paul Pelosi, which was mocked by those in Trump's circle, the firebombing of Josh Shapiro's home, 2 people killed, Melissa Hortman and her husband, and then, of course, January 6th, Harry, right, in which you had 600 people who were accused of assaulting or obstructing police, well over 100 folks who were convicted of it, all pardoned. Not to mention Charlottesville. So let's talk honestly about that. And let's talk about the causes, the Roberts Court and the right wing foisting unhinged gun policies on this country, Trump slashing spending on gun enforcement, on mental health, helping people with mental health issues. That full context has to be considered in a compassionate and appropriate way. A point of personal privilege. I was so proud with my editor-in-chief and one of my closest friends, to go basically live on the Contrarian to talk about this in real time. And I thought we did as good a job as anyone of striking that balance while the story was still unfolding.
Let me say, it's not that hard to get it right. You know who got it right? It was the governor of Utah.
Yes.
He said there's one person responsible for this crime, and we have him. That's it. And we have to decide, I think he was talking to his fellow Utahns, but also to the rest of the country. Can we get an off-ramp? Meaning, can we end this stuff, this kind of collective blame and this nonsense? And we did have some Republicans, very few, but some who did speak out. Tom Tillis, notice they always speak out after they've decided to retire. And also Representative Bacon from Nebraska, who really said, Trump's language is inappropriate. But we have to look for examples where we can find them. You know who had a great statement? Was the Democratic nominee for mayor in New York, Mamdani. He had a beautiful statement about how it's a tragedy when a father of small children is killed. We have a common humanity here. We have a responsibility. It takes some leadership, but this is not rocket science. You just have to have an ounce of decency, which is absolutely missing in our president. And because he has formed this cult of personality, everyone else imitates this, whether they know better or not.
It's quite remarkable because I spent a lot of time yesterday kind of watching the reaction. And, from every Democrat you could imagine, okay, from Ilhan Omar to AOC to Bernie to President Obama to President Clinton, they all made statements saying how terrible it was, expressing sympathy for the family, criticizing political violence without a political valence. They're not making no politically valent remarks there. And then you have the problem on the right is, okay, you've got Tillis and you've got Cox and you've got a few people here and there saying responsible things. And then you've got other people like this congressman who was basically declaring war from the floor of the House, essentially. And you've got all these other people. And then you have the president of the United States who can't do it. Not only, as I mentioned at the top of this show, he said he doesn't care about right-wing violence. He literally said that on television this morning. He's been turning a blind eye to it, and if not fomenting it, kind of winking at it for a long time, going back to 2016 when he talked about the Second Amendment people not being happy with Hillary Clinton. He does not give a shit if somebody is hurt, if that person isn't on his side. If the person is on his side, then, he doesn't really give a shit about that person either. But what he cares about is it can be used, it can be weaponized against his enemies. And that's all he cares about. And too many Americans can't see that. And too many Republicans are too cowardly to point that out.
All right, it is now time for a spirited debate brought to you by our sponsor, Total Wine and More. Each episode, you'll be hearing an expert talk about the pros and cons of a particular issue in the world of wine, spirit, and beverages.
Thank you, Harry. In today's spirited debate, we unpeel the truth about Pinot Noirs to see where the grapes shine best, Willamette Valley in Oregon or Burgundy, France. Here in the U.S., we classify our New World wines by the grape. Old World wines, like those in Europe, are classified by the region. In France, Burgundy is not only the region where Pinot Noir wines are from, but it's also the Pinot's ancestral home. No pressure, Oregon. To level set, Pinot Noir is a thin-skinned grape, which makes it difficult to grow, especially in warmer climates. Burgundy happens to have a cooler climate with ample cloud cover, making it the perfect home for Pinots. The cooler temperature allows the wines to ripen longer, giving the grapes extra time to develop more complex flavors like strawberry and dark berries to black tea and earthy minerality. Burgundy produces Pinot Noirs that are full of aromas and nuances. If we hop across the pond, we have Pinots from Willamette Valley in Oregon with similar cloud cover, climate, and soil composition as Burgundy. Oregon produces smooth and fruity wines that are slightly earthy and most definitely tasty, giving the region of Burgundy a run for its money. You can find all of these at Total Wine & More, where we have a huge selection of Pinot Noirs from Oregon to Burgundy, plus wines from every region in between. All that's left now is to reach up to our shelves and pluck one out for yourself.
Thanks to our friends at Total Wine & More for today's A Spirited Debate. Where are the professional Republicans, not even the current class who've been, totally captured, but the former, remember when Kash Patel's name was raised to Bill Barr and he said, "Over my dead body"? There's a whole cadre of folks, and this maybe leads into the very damning complaint against the FBI that was filed this week by 3 former agents. But why don't you have those professional Republican voices, the equivalent of George W. Bush and on down? That silence is really deafening to me.
Well, history teaches us, Harry, since you were kind enough to allude to my amateur, if intense, historical labors. I spent 3.5 years on that first book, The Last Palace, which, among other things, addresses this question, a history of Czech American democracy over the course of the 20th century. And then a second book about the end of the Cold War and the immediate post-Cold War period in the Czech lands and the mistakes, hubris that America made in the post-communist era. And one of the lessons of that century is that, in fact, my mother, who was a Holocaust survivor, loved to say to me in Yiddish, I think I told this story to George earlier today, the wonderful thing about this podcast is that the 4 of us are all friends and we talk all the time and text throughout the day and whatnot. My mother said to me that people will amaze you in a time of, in a schrecklich Zman, in dark times. People will amaze you both by the bad things they do and the good things they do, but there'll be many more bad things. And we've seen that from the MAGA majority, some stampeding to participate in President Trump's autocratic wrongdoing, and many others enabling, and very few bold voices. George got off the Trump train a long time ago. The decent people mostly did. It's hardly unique, this either active aiding and abetting or the complicity of silence and cowardice is hardly unique to the American experiment. But it's no less distressing that this disease has come washed up on our shores now.
But George raised a really harrowing prospect that this can be leveraged, or they'll attempt to leverage, basically to alienate voters, pox on all their houses, and only isolate the enthusiasm of MAGA voters. In other words, as a way to actually try to make hay in the coming election. Is that the prime thing you're thinking about?
The first requirement is moral clarity. We have to call it like we see it. We have to be clear about who the perpetrator is, which is this one crazed individual. We have to be clear about who is misusing it. We have to be clear that both parties are not behaving the same way. And there are absolute policy issues out there. But you know what? We can't get to the policy issues and a good discussion about gun control or a good conversation about mental health when we are fighting the end of democracy. And so we come back to the initial challenge, which is we must defend democracy. We cannot check out. We don't have the luxury of throwing up our hands. We are willing to join arms with people whose ideological differences with us are vast, but we get back to the work that we have, and we do not pull punches. We do not hide. We do not cower. And that's how we fight this. We are different than they are. We don't lie. We don't smear large groups, but neither do we get so high in the clouds that we forget that we are in a battle for our political lives and for our democracy.
I completely agree with Jen, and I boil it down to three things. One is we have to call out the lies, okay, as they come. We also have to call out the historical parallels and basically say this is something we are not immune from because it's human, and we have seen it in other societies, in other countries, at other times, and it fits the pattern to a T. And the third thing is, as Jen put it, we have to work with good faith people who have different political views. I mean, look at this group here. I mean, I have different political views than all of you. Spencer Cox is saying the right things. Tom Tillis is saying the right. We have to depoliticize facts, and we have to depoliticize historical context. And the way we do that is to persuade people who haven't been looking at this in the same way that we have, or now I've been looking at it this way in terms of authoritarianism since about 2019 now. We have to make them realize this is what's at stake here. The people of good faith, and educate them and make them feel guilty if they don't speak up.
You're leaving one aspect.
Okay, 4.
Implicit in what you say that I would like to make explicit. And that's the moral obligation to be good at politics. The pro-democracy camp needs to be able to articulate policies, not to go to working people with our fancy policy-based language, but to find a more visceral and decent and moral populism. We need to win on issues like guns and mental health. And then when we are successful, we need to be able to both deliver and communicate that success. The Biden administration at a policy level was fantastically successful, not as great at talking to people about it. That is a moral obligation to take care of our politics and our country. And that is the solution to the sporadic. It is not an epidemic of political violence. It's sporadic violence that targets both sides. There's a danger it could get worse now. Donald Trump is failing in and at the polls. Democrats have either outperformed or won in 42 of 43 special and by-elections this year. They've done so by an average of 16 points, which is 4 points more, a statistically significant margin vis-a-vis the last time we went through this in 2017. And despite the damage the generic Democratic brand, although they're ahead in the horse race for, which party you'd like to see control Congress, there's tremendous vitality at the candidate level. And I think in the public is ahead of us. The public is leading here in rejecting, it's not just at the polls, it's in polling, rejecting this authoritarianism with Donald Trump. We have to provide an alternative. We have to make a commitment. And then we have to deliver on it and cement a new supermajority. That is the way out.
I'll just add there, here's where I wanted to start, by the way.
Harry, I love your Lauren Bacall voice.
Exactly. You know how to smoke, don't you know?
I've got
Hey, which is just the thing to insist on is where I started. There are very huge problems of political rhetoric and violence, but then there's law enforcement. We should insist on, of course, that is reprehensible, has to be taken care of as a law enforcement problem. And it's the other side that is more kind of mixing and matching and trying to exploit it in political terms. This is an isolated law enforcement problem in the first instance, and it shouldn't be sort of mixed together. Which brings me to what a week for the FBI. We've had this omnibus lawsuit brought by 3 senior people there.
I hope they have a good lawyer.
If 1/5 of it is true, an absolute story of capture that rivals the Department of Justice. As a former law enforcement or DOJ guy, I was really appalled. Did you guys have a sense of where we are in the FBI, and they are already so deep in as to be unable to be dug out.
I spoke with our friend Andrew Weissman a couple days ago, who is the general counsel for the FBI in his day. And I think he gave a very good framework for thinking about this. On one hand, at the senior level, we have a complete dysfunction, a hollowing out, a horrible pattern being set of determining culprits and determining outcomes that comes not just from Kash Patel, but the president, who's already calling for the death penalty. By the way, the one thing that a defense attorney is going to point to in avoiding the death penalty is the president of the United States calling for a death penalty. So thanks very much for that, Mr. President. But as bad as that is, he also points to the hundreds, I was going to say thousands, but there are less thousands than there used to be because Trump has been firing so many people. The thousands of people who do their job at the bottom level. And the fact that this person was apprehended. And it's very difficult sometimes because the senior people so color our view of the FBI, and they have so diminished confidence in the organization to understand that at the time that they are what our friend Ruth Ben-Ghiat calls creating learned incompetence at the top, there are still very conscientious, wonderful, committed patriots who are doing the day-to-day work. But this is the problem with this administration, whether it's the Pentagon, whether it is the CDC, whether it is DOJ, and that is they are hollowing out the ranks of truth-telling professionals and filling them with flunkies and incompetence. And that is dangerous, whether it's on the high seas, whether it's the vaccine policy that we're going to wind up with, or whether it's the FBI. And these people are taking a blowtorch to government, which is very, very dangerous. And it will result in people losing their lives and suffering great pain.
+1 to all of that. Andrew Weissman is a national treasure. He really is. To George's question, they do have an extraordinary legal team. Abby Lowell, God bless him, he left Big Law when, that is like going back to my mom's. Mostly it'll be bad surprises. Sometimes it's good surprises. Abby Lowell, who left Big Law and has brought his considerable trial skills to defending democracy and the people involved in democracy. Often privileged to work with him. Margaret Donovan and the group at Kossoff who did Sandy Hook are on this complaint. Mark Zaid, who's one of our nation's finest whistleblower lawyers, Heidi Barakowitz, who's a specialist in D.C. They're the four, Heidi Barakowitz and their firms, specialist in D.C. on federal employment matters, including FBI agents. And to Jen's point, the hollowing out of the FBI that is described in this shocking, shocking document is going to make us all much more dangerous. Kash Patel was fortunate that this young man reportedly turned himself in at the urging of his father. The sheer incompetence that we saw, and they among others who had been fired was a specialist in Utah who was the special agent in charge. Harry, you know all about this as a U.S. attorney and former senior DOJ official, who was a specialist in justice. So it's part of a much larger theme of the ways that the Trump administration is making all of us poorer and more endangered and average folks, whether it's firing the CDC experts, where I, with Abby, represent some of those fired. That exposes the country in a health dimension. And on and on. He tried another one of my cases. We have over 125 of them, as I said. The TSA union. We went and got an injunction to stop the dissolution of the TSA union. It's the main vehicle for safety complaints by those who who work at TSA checkpoints. Fortunately, the court froze Trump from doing that. I could literally give 1,000 examples, thousands of examples.
But that raises, I want to push back or at least ask again about Jen's point about Andrew in particular, who no one knows the FBI better, but his overall sanguinity, because what we really, that's what the complaint brought to light. We'd heard about some of the most prominent moves, but a general culture in which, one of the plaintiffs is interviewed by a kid and asked, have you ever voted for a Democrat? And did you vote for Trump? And there's only one North Star there. It's support of Trump. And that, to me, gets to a hollowing out problem that's more than just at the very top.
In addition to the hollowing out, there's just a diversion of resources, obviously, toward the immigration aspect of the immigration enforcement. But also, we've read, I don't know the details on this, but they are the administration is downplaying or shutting down the FBI's focus on extremism, extremist groups, particularly because so many of them are on the right. And we have, if you see the numbers from the Anti-Defamation League, they put out statistics on where the political violence in our country comes from. And I saw a couple of these graphs yesterday, and I don't have the precise numbers, but it was something like 65 to 75% right-wing. It was 20%, maybe 15, 25, homegrown Islamists. And then the rest, maybe 5, 10% max left-wing. Tifa or whatever it might be. And they don't like that. They don't like that. It's part of their attitude that we were going to imagine it away. It's also part of the president's suggestion, again, today, that he doesn't care about right-wing extremism. And the FBI is basically neutering its ability to counter that, which is crazy in this political context.
And the blaring message, they're sensitive to advance and the like, that you take on cases on the other side and you may find yourself actually getting sacked going forward. I got an overall picture of just real chaos and disarray, and just nobody knows, which way the wind is blowing there. And for law enforcement that has to act decisively in the field, it's a potential catastrophe. One of the revelations in this complaint is who was really the ultimate enforcer. Driscoll says he was brought in by Emile Beauvais, Third Circuit judge, and told that he's got to fire people because Stephen Miller says so. In other words, there's a suggestion of the kind of same ideological blanketing across federal law enforcement.
Well, we're not litigating this particular case. We have represented large numbers of FBI agents since January, and we've succeeded in getting court relief in various forms, including what appeared to be Emile Beauvais gathering lists of thousands of names in order to purge them. And I can tell you that what you've alluded to is one of the most disturbing aspects of that really jam-packed speaking complaint. And there's one other point in that section that's very important. Patel said he would follow those political dictates from the White House, even though he knew it was illegal. Apart from that, he told, according to the complaint, he told Mr. Driscoll that he knew it was illegal. So when you have the FBI agent following dictates of political revenge and admitting, allegedly, that he's acting illegally, that represents a further dimension of the profound threat to democracy that we've been talking about this entire gathering. But, for years now, all of us have been warning of this and that it's a serious threat. And the four of us do have that in common, that we have not been sugarcoating. Some very smart people refused to believe it, even though Trump was saying the quiet and the loud parts. He was shouting the quiet part out loud.
And look, the corollary to insisting on the law enforcement as a separate thing is it leads to this dystopian nightmare. You finally knock on that door and say, here's the crime. And they're like, Who did you vote for in the last election? My biggest focus this week was what I thought was about as bad a shadow docket ruling as we've had from the Supreme Court, if not, and totally cryptic. But my editor-in-chief expressed specific interest in the really intriguing development and a kind of case in opposition to what's happened in the U.S., namely in Brazil, where the Supreme Court, where a panel of Brazilian justices convicted former President Bolsonaro. So I just wanted, because our time is short, to serve that up to you, Jen, for why you think that's an important development in the international world.
I think it's fascinating in two respects. First of all, there's actually a democratic country that is able to hold a former president responsible
Right.
in court for having instituted a illegal coup. Wow. And I did not have Brazil is the leading democracy on my bingo card for this decade or this century. But bravo to them. It is also, because they have done that, now the subject of Trump and his wormy Secretary of State, Marco Rubio's revenge, that they're going to take some retaliation because Brazil, under its law, convicted a guy who tried to overthrow the government. This is just nuts on top of nuts. And all the way, of course, he has raised tariffs, another completely abhorrent action without legal authority whatsoever on Brazil because they had the temerity to convict a instigator of a coup. So we are like through the looking glass big time here. And I think it behooves other democratic countries, frankly, to speak up and to say, no, that just as we respect your laws, America, probably more than Trump does, we expect all democratic countries to recognize the legal outcomes, the political outcomes in other democracies. That's part of what being a democracy is about, is that you recognize legitimacy of other democracies. So it is disturbing to say the least. And frankly, it's embarrassing. It is just embarrassing that we, because of our Supreme Court, we're so incapable of holding Trump legally to account that he wound up back in the White House. And now you have him and his lapdog seeking revenge on a Democratic ally is just appalling. You know, it is what comes from people not caring, disengaging, and from letting this get to such a state that we allow someone like Donald Trump to return to the White House.
And I'll just say this as a sort of capper of it. George's thesis, which we all endorse, which is there's one thing and one thing only, and nothing else matters, which is criticism of Trump. When you apply that model to this sociopathology and the international world, I got to imagine professionals in the State Department and others, and you would know them, Norm, are just like, who is this guy and what is he doing to us? You take all the kind of chaos of the domestic scene, apply it to the international scene, and it's a really not just corrupt, but sort of deeply erratic and uncertain time, I think.
They all know who this guy is because they're familiar with despots from the rest of the world. And we've just been fortunate that even our worst presidents in the modern era, even Nixon, I mean, Nixon is, you know.
Donald Trump's the best thing that ever happened to Richard Nixon.
He's like a Lincoln or a Washington compared to Donald Trump. I mean, so they know this kind of tyrannical, dictatorial despotism, and the four of us saw it. And our country is going to have to seriously address, from a policy perspective, things like the corruption of the Supreme MAGA tribunal. You can't call the Roberts Court, really. You know, I hesitate to call them a judicial body.
You know, Harry, there was an article, I think it was the New York Times, that said Trump stands separate as Ukraine and Israel carry out, their policies. No, he is ignored because he is sneered at. He is incompetent. He has become a symbol of weakness and erratic behavior so that we are now ignored. It's not that he is standing apart as if he is all beneath him. It's that no one needs to talk to him, wants to talk to him, thinks that talking to him is the least productive.
I think what they meant is he was standing apart with his back turned to the classroom in the corner where they put the dunce. He is the saving grace is the guy is the most incompetent dictator and tyrant. Just look how easily the Europeans are able to
manipulate
diffuse him. They flatter him, and suddenly he's so superficial. And then there's, of course, George and I did a thing for the Contrarian where we walked through Washington as I think it was part of the No Kings celebration. And we ended our walk of all the landmarks of the Trump administration at a taco stand because Trump always chickens out. He is so superficial. And that's fortunate that he doesn't bring the determination and experience and intelligence to tyranny of an Orban or an Erdogan, because we'd be in a lot more trouble. We're in a lot of trouble already. We'd be in a lot more trouble.
I just want to say ugly, tough times, but I'm always proud to be on the front lines with the Contrarians and especially you three. Thanks very much for being here, and we'll see in a few more weeks in the next Contrarian episode what else this crazy, corrupt government has in store for us.
Well, thank you, Harry. And you get kudos for being brave enough to have the three of us, which are sort of like the Marx Brothers of podcasts on at the same time.
Oh, we were well behaved.
I guess that makes me Zeppo or Gummo, probably.
Harry Zeppo Littman.
Thank you so much, George, Norm, and Jen. Great to be with you, and great to be with fellow Contrarians on a week like this one. And thank you very much, listeners, for tuning in to Talking Feds. If you like what you've heard, please tell a friend to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts or wherever they get their podcasts, and please take a moment to rate and review the show. You can also subscribe to us on YouTube, where we are posting full episodes and my daily takes on top legal stories. Check us out as well on Substack at harrylittman.substack.com, where I'll be posting 2 or 3 bulletins a week, breaking down the various threats to constitutional norms and the rule of law. And Talking Feds has joined forces with the Contrarian. I'm a founding contributor to this bold new media venture, committed to reviving the diversity of opinion that feels increasingly rare in today's news landscape, where legacy media seems to be tacking toward Trump for business reasons rather than editorial ones. Rest assured, we're still the same scrappy, independent podcast you've come to know and trust, just now linked up with an ambitious project designed for this pivotal moment in our nation's legal and political discourse. Find out more at contrarian.substack.com. Thanks for tuning in, and don't worry, as long as you need answers, the feds will keep talking. Talking Feds is produced by Luke Cregan and Katie Upshaw. Associate producer, Becca Havian. Sound engineering by Matt McGardle. Rosie Dawn Griffin, David Lieberman, Hamza Mahadrenathan, Emma Maynard, and Hallie Necker are our contributing writers. And production assistance by Akshaj Turbailu and Sebastian Navarro. Our music, as ever, is by the amazing Philip Glass. Talking Feds is a production of Delito LLC. I'm Harry Littman. Talk to you later.